What team do you see yourself participating in? I guess if that question makes sense to you.
Yeah, great, all great questions. I see myself participating in the 2nd District team.
Yeah,
I will align myself with leaders and ideas that are good for our district. Because ultimately, I'm an employee. I'm a public servant hired by the voters of the 2nd District. I'm not beholden to anyone else.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert Macfarlane, and today we have the Congressional District 2 candidate running against current incumbent Celeste Maloy. His name is Colby Jenkins. He's a colonel in the United States Army, West Point graduate. We talked a lot about his military experience and his perspective on what needs to change in Congress. We hope you enjoy this episode. You get a lot of information about him. There's a lot on the ballot in November, so we want to make sure that we're getting as many candidates to you as possible. So we hope you enjoy this episode. He's a great guy, a true patriot. Make sure you go to Colby4Utah.com. That's COLBYFOR Utah.com to find out more information about him. And like and subscribe. Don't forget to keep supporting our page so we can keep getting information out to you about the political arena here in Southern Utah. Thanks for all of our support. Thanks to all of our supporters for everything that you do. Enjoy this one, guys. We'll see you out there.
You know, I've never thought about running for politics. This is the first foray into this world, other than we'll talk hopefully at some point that I did spend 9 years in Washington, D.C. and worked on the Hill, in the Pentagon, in between both, and in the White House, just working congressional affairs. But why didn't I jump in? Well, specifically, I just started a new job, a new civilian job, just a few weeks before Chris Stewart announced his resignation. So personally, I couldn't ramp up in a new job and try and figure out how to run a campaign and do all that. And so my thinking was I'll just be a good delegate. I was a state delegate. And I thought I'll make sure I'm engaged and vet candidates how I'm supposed to. And then as a senior veteran in Southern Utah, I can organize and help mobilize veterans to support whoever's best for us. And so I just thought I would be a good Republican and be involved. And then as I got to know all the delegates or the candidates and saw the process play itself out and then produce Celeste, I knew I couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore.
Okay, tell me more. So I've heard a couple of different things, and I've had a challenge getting like real clarity or honesty out of some candidates because you're running for the party ticket, the candidacy. You're not collecting signatures. I'm guessing you're going straight to the caucus. You're going for a caucus vote. Is that right?
Doing both.
You're doing both.
Yeah,
okay.
Dual path, and I can talk about that too.
Yeah. And so what did you learn along the way? Had you been a delegate before last year, I guess?
I had, yes.
Okay.
I was coming up on 2 years that I've been a delegate since the last major state convention.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've been involved in that process. I'm my precinct chairman. My wife's involved as well. And
cool.
We just knew we had to just be involved. That's part of being a good American. And
yeah. Blake and I were talking about how difficult it is to just stay plugged in. So I was looking at, you think about what the ballot they're going to get in the mail is this year, and it's going to have a president on there. It's going to have a governor on there. It's going to have congressmen. It's going to have a senator. It's going to have state senators on there. It's full. It's going to have a school board. It's going to have, it's a full thing. And, just going through. So I've interviewed basically the top 5 from some of the polls I've seen of the top 5 senatorial candidates. And then last year I did the congressman, but I interviewed all the city council members, which was I think I interviewed 10 St. George city council members and then all the ones in Washington city. So trying to give the locals clarity on who they should vote for at the local level. And then now you get the state level. I'm like, well, who do I don't, there's not enough time. Blake, we want to do one episode every week. We think that's a lot. And getting people to plug in even at that hyper local level seemed difficult, but it seems like it goes over people's heads. So delegates are really important. So
they are.
What did you learn?
So truly being a delegate means, one, you've put yourself out there that I'm going to step up for my neighborhood. I'm going to be a good neighbor and try and vet those who have jumped into the arena, and hopefully I would have the pulse of my neighborhood and be talking to my neighbors and understand the concerns of my local neighborhood so that I could overlay those on the candidates and what I'm hearing and learning. And then going to the county convention, with that same lens of here are the concerns of my neighborhood, and then going to the state and similarly there. So I was a county delegate and then a state delegate, and been able to participate in both of those processes. And, that's the bread and butter of Utah politics, delegates, the convention. And as a candidate now myself, that is where we are hyper-focused on engaging delegates and making sure that that I am personally calling them and reaching out. I'm making tons of calls and meeting with all kinds of people and listening and learning, both on the phone, and then we're doing town halls and specifically targeting people who have been, because technically right now nobody's a delegate. We were all released, but generally those who have been delegates before will hopefully run again.
Yeah, and they run March 5th, right?
March 5th, yeah.
March 5th.
So coming out of that night, each precinct will have elections to elect 5 county delegates and then 2 state ones. And so from that March 5th, then we'll have the final slate of who the delegates are.
Yeah.
And then we'll become even more focused on who those folks are. And just making sure I listen, I learn, I understand what's important to them, and then give them an opportunity to check us out and see what my team's all about.
So when you went through this process last year, so what's making you step into the race now?
Yeah. And that's the question. That's the $1 million question, right? Because why would anybody want to do this?
Yeah.
So for me, it boils down to a couple of things. One, I look at the world, I look at our country, I look at the border, I look at our economy, and I look at the reaction to Congress and the leaders and how they're failing to react to it. So I want to run to try and engage on that in that avenue. But then I also want to make sure our current representative for me is insufficient, and I want to offer a positive contrast in experience, in leadership, judgment, accountability, and then service that I feel is lacking right now. And so it's important that this cycle, since the special election produced, a winner, if you will, but that really the winner will happen this year for a full cycle. So it's important for me if there's an opportunity to correct that or offer a choice for voters, then now's the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, you think this time around, because I looked at her voting record so far, and she's basically voted yes on almost everything. Yeah. So anything that's been brought up, she's voted yes for, right? Yeah. So whether that's progressing forward or otherwise, what would you have been doing differently? Maybe compare and contrast you and Celeste in the current moment based on what you've seen so far. Yeah,
great. And great questions up. So I overlay a couple of things. One is leadership, judgment, accountability. And then those are founded on or sit on the foundation of limited government, fiscal responsibility, and then national security. So that's how I'm approaching the problem sets, the votes that I would have to take. 16 days after being sworn in to Congress, Celeste had a critical opportunity to support and defend our Constitution. And I don't know how deep you want me to get into the weeds, but each year there's a bill called the National Defense Authorization Act.
Right.
So it's the bill that has to pass every year to authorize the military to exist, essentially, to have their authorizations, that authorizes then appropriations and so forth.
I mean, this is really how it's supposed to work, right? You have, the defense bills, you have budgetary policy bills based off of the different segments of the government, right? It shouldn't be just one big budget bill that gets passed, as one big
omnibus,
old, And I don't even know where they came up with this name, but it's basically where it used to be each committee has their own budgets that are passed, and they're supposed to be zero balanced. They're supposed to balance their budget each that they present, and then Congress can review each individual one. But they don't do that anymore, right? They just
more or less. Yeah.
It's basically the defense bill, and then everything else is really the only two big votes every year. Am I understanding that right?
That's what the trend has been of late. With our new speaker, he's working diligently to break that up, to make sure we go back to our 12 or 13 individual appropriations bills instead of a 2,000 to 3,000 page omnibus that nobody reads and everybody just rubber stamps.
Yeah.
And so in the case of the National Defense Authorization Act, it's a must pass.
Yeah.
So Congress recognizes that, and traditionally in the 11th, the 12th hour, they'll parachute in poison provisions and attach it to it that are not germane. They have nothing to do with that bill, but they'll attach it on knowing that it's a must pass, and that the members of Congress will essentially hold their nose and vote yes on it. Yeah. And whatever they passed, we'll fix it later. Just a rubber stamp, go along to get along.
Right.
And so this past year, there was a critical provision that was attached, and that was called the FISA, the Provision 702, specifically of the Foreign Internal Surveillance Act. So after 9/11, our government all of us recognized we were blind to threat. We didn't know who the bad guys were talking to inside our country and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So our government created the Foreign Internal Surveillance Act, FISA, and some secret courts that allow FBI agents, intelligence world to do warrantless wiretaps of communications coming from external to internal, and then by extension, internal to external. Mm-hmm. So basically spying on Americans without a warrant.
Right.
So if you go back to our Constitution, the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution protects us from that, illegal search and seizure. But our Congress at that time wrote new law that allowed for that right, our privilege to be protected, to basically be overridden. Mm-hmm. Over the past 20 years, that power, anytime we give government more power, make things easier for the government to get into our lives, they're not going to give that back.
Yeah.
And they're certainly not going to use it correctly.
Yeah.
And so over the last 20 years of having this unlimited power to search our records, essentially, external to internal, without a warrant, the government's abused that. Mm-hmm. That power was set to expire last year, 2023.
Okay.
So lots of arguments, hey, we need this power. We're going to be blind if we don't have it. We don't know who the bad guys are talking to.
Yeah.
But Senator Lee, our senator, and others, Rand Paul, thankfully, dug into this. And they have been for years, trying to blow the horn, saying, hey, the government is abusing this power. And they cited, more recently last fall, Senator Lee in an open hearing with the FBI director, cited hundreds of thousands of times where FBI agents without warrants illegally accessed these records.
Yeah.
Examples, they pulled records of people who've donated to Trump, FBI agents that worked in the Biden administration without warrants.
Yeah.
So if you donated to Trump, if I did, if anyone, they were pulling your records.
I think even they were using that as an argument to say if you reposted on social media
January 6th or something.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like any extension of conspiracy, right? They're kind of lump in this whole thing as like this is a Patriot Act type event of saying, well, we can survey and find out information about any American for basically any reason that we want, right?
Yes.
Is that
without
right?
a warrant.
Yeah. Without no judge to stamp it. It completely eliminates the ability for the judicial system to check the power of the executive branch, right?
So exactly. So you're already tracking on it. So that power was set to expire. Senator Lee was adamant we can't continue to rubber stamp this.
This thing has to stop.
It has to stop. And the FBI's rebuttal was, well, we're going to fix it. We're going to put in more regulations.
Later.
Wink, wink.
Yeah,
like we've been saying we would do for 20 years.
Right.
So the opportunity to squash that and stop it was last December.
Right.
So that was attached to the Defense Authorization Bill, that NDAA, which I worked on for 9 years when I was in Washington, D.C. I'm intimately familiar with this bill. So for Celeste or anyone to say he doesn't know what he's talking about, no, I've worked on it longer than she has.
Yeah.
So the thought of me voting no on that is painful because I am in the military. My daughter's in the military. But we can defend our civil rights and our nation at the same time.
Yeah.
Too often here in Congress, we hear our politicians, the establishment, say, well, it's either yes or no. But it's not binary like that.
Right.
There's a third choice. Do your job.
Yeah.
Don't just vote yes because I don't want to do my job. Don't just vote yes out of fear. You can vote no on principle or yes on principle.
Yeah.
But you do your job.
Yeah.
So instead of standing up for that abuse of power, Celeste rubber stamped it and passed it through.
Yeah.
With the rationale that, hey, I support the military. We'll fix it later.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, it's offensive to put something that's unconstitutional, abuse of government power on the backs of our military. Now, the military's wheels are not going to drop off. The military is not going to explode by not passing that. Yeah. That forces Congress to do its job. The NDA will ultimately get passed. The military will continue just fine.
Right.
But all too often, it's business as usual. Mm-hmm. And it's evident that there was another choice because people made that choice. Yeah. Senator Lee voted no. Senator Romney voted yes. Mm-hmm. Celeste voted with Senator Romney and not with Senator Lee on this critical issue.
I think Representative Curtis voted no as well. Correct?
He did. Yep.
He voted no on that as well, which I thought was really fascinating. Is how we're the Utah delegation. There's only 6 of us.
Yes.
We only get 6 voices. There's 53, 56 in California, right? It's it's interesting to me. One of the candidates for the Senate seat keeps calling it the ruby red state, right? Mm-hmm. How we're like, we're this red conservative state and we have these values and fundamentals and, that's what gives us strength and things like that. Yet within this particular topic, our own delegation is split on this.
Literally split. And interesting point, this past Saturday night at the Washington County Lincoln Day dinner, I had a gentleman come at me quite aggressive on this issue, saying,
I know I got the survey results on it, and I was like, I'm fascinated with these poll results, because I'm like, this is so interesting to me. It's like, how are these numbers making sense? I just don't get it.
So, on the straw poll?
Yeah, on the straw poll that they did. Anyway, keep going. What
we'll talk about that for sure. But this gentleman came at me, clearly a Celeste supporter, and was arguing that, hey, this wasn't unconstitutional. This is the law. The government can do this. And I just listened to him, and he was saying, show me any bill that doesn't have something wrong with it. Right. Senator Lee he always votes no. Like that didn't have anything to do with the issue. He just is always a no vote. And I just smiled, shook my head, and I wasn't snarky back with him, but in my mind I'm thinking, you are the exact example of the establishment.
Yeah.
You are the reason that we are in this mess. Yeah. Because in your mind you can rationalize this vote, this position, to make it yes. Mm-hmm. When back to our Constitution, to our founders, that is not okay.
Yeah.
And so I just had to chuckle inside, thinking that you can rationalize your fear and your lack of principle all day long, but at the end of the day, that jeopardizes our nation.
Yeah, it's just a weird way that we use fear too, because no matter what the topic is, you can use fear to manipulate either side of the agreement. But I think the whole point of having a constitution and these real clear set rules that we're just all supposed to fall into, and I think it's a lack of problem solving. It's almost like the elected officials are less interested in working hard to creatively, and I use the word creatively loosely, because creativity isn't necessarily what we should be leading with. We should be leading with experience and like proven, like this has been done in the past specifically for a reason. We don't have to keep remaking the wheel, right? Yeah. But when we have a difficult problem like this, is I guess the assumption being we can't monitor or survey the population and organizing internally within our own borders to protect ourselves from another terrorist attack, right?
Yeah.
And I think the same logic goes as if we don't continue to fund this overseas war and keep the battle there instead of at home, then that's going to somehow undermine our ability to protect our own borders, right? Yeah. And so it's using, facts A and B to justify this fact F over here. They're correlated, but they're not causal. There's no direct connection, right? And we do this over and over again. It's so interesting to me that we continue to fall into it.
Yeah.
But that establishment, I think the incumbents win 80+% of the time.
Yep.
And it's not helpful.
Yes.
It's not helpful. Yeah. It's not helpful for replenishing that liberty piece that the founding fathers kind of envisioned when we started moving forward with this whole experiment.
For sure. Right? And pulling on that thread a little bit more, how the establishment protects itself. And to be clear, I am not a one issue candidate. Like, I am not running just because of that vote that Celeste compromised our Constitution and our liberty. I mean, that's a huge thing.
Right.
But that's indicative of a trend. That's indicative of the lack of experience and judgment, and how the establishment has truly wrapped its arms around Celeste. Mm-hmm. So if you rewind a little bit, and from my experience, when I filed in January to be a candidate, when I sat in the lieutenant governor's boardroom area, they looked up to see if I was a registered Republican, and I was a registered Republican in Utah at the time I filed. Mm-hmm. When Celeste filed last year, she was not in the special election, but the government just did a hand wave.
It's like the Jedi. This is not the candidate you're looking for.
And some candidates actually sued her to claiming, hey, by the rules, you were not eligible to be a candidate. Uh-huh. Now that was found to be okay in court. So, hey, that's the law. We move on. But ask yourself, why is there one standard for one person and one different for the other?
Yeah, that's an important question.
And then to follow up on that some more, voting. Why was she not a registered Republican? Well, she hadn't voted in so many elections recently that the Utah Republican Party dropped her from the rolls. Hadn't even voted. Yeah. So now to stand here in front of you and I and ask for our vote when the right and the privilege to vote wasn't even on her radar for multiple years, to me is offensive. I've spent 30 years with the patch of the American flag on my shoulder, putting my life, not literally on the line, but being willing to support and defend the Constitution, and by extension, our right to vote, and to have a member of Congress ask for my vote, or someone trying, and not even want to be serious about that right is offensive to me. And it's important. So I don't want to run a negative campaign, but it's important that people see these contrasts in judgment, in accountability, in experience, in just being a serious candidate, a person who wants to be a true public servant to those who they are asking to represent.
So many times, I mean, people vote for the oddest reasons, right? And so, there's only certain, and we kind of talked on this a little bit, is we can get mired down in individual policy issues, why this person voted for this or that reason. And I think a lot of times we can rationalize our own thoughts, and it's got to be a tough thing to either decide yes or no, right? Or abstain, right? We have the opportunity to just not vote, right? Yeah. But when you're in this system where there's pressure from lots of different angles. Yeah. I could see how it's not an easy gig. You're trying to compromise, which I don't really love the idea of compromising, meaning that this thing is less important than this thing. But we do have to prioritize, okay, if I'm going to play a chess game, sometimes you got to lose your bishop so you could take the rook, right? If, especially from like a military tactics perspective. But at a certain point, your life's not on the line. Your decision to say no and stand up for this thing that you know to be right, or you believe in, your value, if that means the party doesn't support you on your next election, or if that means the citizens don't elect you next time around, well, that's just part of playing the game. You could actually just go home and live in your house, and you could actually just go on with your life and continue to operate in the greatest country in the world, right? Yeah. And so it's interesting that people aren't willing to put that on the line when it's not. It's not life or death for them.
Nobody's shooting at us.
No one's shooting.
Knock on wood.
Not yet. I mean, not yet. I've seen some other parliaments. They throw blows at each other. We haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm probably close sometimes, but it's just interesting that you can rationalize those things. So obviously, being a colonel in the Army, you went to West Point. You're a native of Utah, but remind me where you're from.
Roosevelt, Utah.
Roosevelt. That's what you said.
Utah, yeah.
So small town.
Small town, yeah.
And then when did you get to St. George?
So we've been coming, so just to back up a little bit, born and raised in Roosevelt, Utah, left Roosevelt to go to West Point, and then went to West Point for 2 years, left and served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Brazil, then went back to West Point, graduated, then that launched me into the Army.
What year did you graduate from West Point?
99.
99, okay.
Yeah, and then combat tours in Afghanistan, time in South America doing counter-drug, and then hostage rescue missions in South America. And then a different battlefield in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I came off of real combat, and my command saw potential, saw an opportunity for me to take my experience working with tribal mullahs, tribal leaders, and grumpy Colombian colonels, and seeing the success that my team and I had in building relationships and coalitions there. They said, well, let's send you to Washington, D.C., to that battlefield where there are tribal leaders, mullahs, just maybe they don't wear beards and turbans, but those principles are still the same. And so I spent roughly about 9 years in Washington, D.C. as a Green Beret representative, liaison to Congress, and then being a legislative director in the Pentagon for the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I worked in between the Pentagon, Capitol Hill, the White House, the interagency for quite a while. And fortunately, I swam in that swamp with a solid snorkel.
Yeah,
I didn't drown.
Yeah,
I've been there. I'm familiar with the pressures. I know the twists and turns that are applied on members, on staff, because I've lived it.
Yeah, a close friend of mine. He's a major in the Army. He's close to pinning lieutenant colonel here.
Oh, great.
But he served in the Pentagon. He was a liaison and an advisor to one of the congressmen in Georgia.
Okay.
And so he's kind of kept me, he tells me kind of the things that he sees, and there's definitely this establishment power that happens in being in the military, especially when you got a uniform on, even though you might be in a suit but in tie, but being in the military, there's some protection in there for that standpoint, right? Because you still have a clear chain of command, and there's not as much influence. There's as much pressure, but you get to witness it. That you're right there in the thick of
it for sure,
witnessing all that there is in there. Is it as much of a swamp as they just say? It seems like it is. It seems like it is.
It is. You know, I would be in closed door hearings, and I'll answer your question about how I got to St. George. But I would.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I would be in closed door hearings, even classified hearings, where members would be. They'd be very friendly with us and asking good questions and seem to be satisfied. And they would literally walk out of the room, and there'd be a bank of reporters, and they would. I could say senator names, but. They would literally say right there, like not even 5 seconds from leaving, I am not satisfied with it. They did not tell us anything helpful. Like, Senator, what happened in the 5 seconds that you left the room? You know, so it's, we saw those games played. And then I traveled the world with both professional staff and members of Congress, showing them important operations for special ops around the world and making sure they understood what we were needing and what they were approving.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff in South America doesn't get any headlines. There's no media, but there's a lot of things that we're involved in the South that I think it's really important work. It's a requirement, but it definitely doesn't get any. Yeah, it doesn't get any face time, which is probably good, honestly. Like if it's in the media, it's probably
and it goes with our motto as Green Berets. Our formal motto is quiet professionals.
Yeah,
we let
the SEALs don't have that motto. I don't think the SEALs have that motto. I know. I knew you couldn't, but
read their books and watch their movies.
Exactly,
they'll tell you about it.
They're too happy to tell you.
They're called Hollywood for a reason.
They're called Hollywood for a reason. Yeah. Blake Special Forces too over here.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So no, just Marine.
Just Marine. Okay,
hey,
Marine.
Nothing just about
That's pretty
Marines.
Special.
Yeah.
Hey, once a Marine, always a Marine. That's pretty special to me.
Special. We got a special bus. That's about
special bus.
Well, you're the men's department of the Navy, I've heard, so that's good.
It depends on the day, I guess. Right?
Yeah,
that's pretty funny. So you
how I got here.
Going back to how'd you get back to St. George? Yeah.
So that time in DC, I was both a mix of active duty, wearing a suit, like you said, and then I transitioned to the Guard and was a government civilian working in and around the Pentagon, but then left the Pentagon, the bloat of bureaucracy, and went to actually Silicon Valley through other jobs and worked in the tech industry and got to experience, from one end of the spectrum to the other, from the Pentagon, which is huge bureaucracy, to the cutting edge of Silicon Valley, and where the toughest problems can meet the best solutions, essentially. And so spent a couple of years there working in the tech field. But my in-laws and family have been here in the St. George area, my wife's family, and so we've been visiting here for 2 decades, and some land became available. We wanted to move. COVID hit, and so that was the impetus for us to get the heck out of California and come back closer to home and family. And so we own a home here. The job that brought me back here was to be the director of the Innovation Plaza at Dixie State, now Utah Tech.
Okay, cool.
So I've had wonderful experiences there, helping entrepreneurs like yourself take their ideas and help them grow, gain funding, help them gain intellectual property protection. The Atwood Innovation Plaza in particular is just full of experts and good people and mentors. And so I just had the privilege of kind of running just helping good people connect with other good people.
I love that program. I had Rick Atkin on the program. We talked a lot about what he's done there, but then I've had the CEO of Intergalactic in. So a lot of the tech companies that St. George has, there's definitely this growing group of entrepreneurs in Innovation Plaza and Utah Tech or Dixie Tech. They Dixie State / Dixie Tech, Utah Tech, all the tech ones. Basically what we've become. I mean, that's really been the cornerstone of where the city wants to go, which I think is great. I think that's definitely the high wage jobs and stuff that we need. So that's awesome that you're helping lead that.
Yeah, that's where I was. I'm not there anymore.
Okay.
So my boss in Silicon Valley joined another company, and an opportunity became available with him.
Oh, okay, cool.
A company called Crown Castle that builds the majority of our cell phone and fiber infrastructure in the nation.
Interesting.
So I work, they're a national company, but I work remote here for them.
So telecommunications, that's a whole nother world about even going into regulation, right? Regulation, what happened in Washington really shaped telecommunications, and it's continuing to shape, telecommunications even today and into the future. So that's pretty fascinating. So what other big issue topics really have kind of do you want to spearhead or that you want to carry with you with that delegation back to DC?
Yeah, when you look at our Utah delegation currently right now, there's near zero military experience, defense related. Blake Moore has some agency type experience, but direct combat veteran military experience, we don't have any for our state. And that's a shame.
We got a lot of veterans here.
We do. And we have defense industry that is vital to our economy and other interests. So for me, it's about helping make sure that our delegation has a more robust experience in that regard. But then taking that experience back to Capitol Hill and you look at Afghanistan and what happened there and how we just tucked our tail and ran, the catastrophe that was. And I wouldn't argue that we stay in Afghanistan a day longer than we should have. And those 20 years there were filled with mistakes. Mm-hmm. But the manner in which our leadership got us out of there is unforgivable.
Yeah.
And so for me, I see opportunity to make sure, one, that there is accountability for such situations like that. Two, because it's personal to me. I'm still in the military. My own daughter will be a young officer here soon. Mm-hmm. And when I think of her generation and the hot mess that they're about to step into and the seat that the 2nd District could have at the table influencing that, and I ask myself, who do I want in that chair? Someone who's never bothered, well, not never, but could really not care less about voting, who is already compromised in terms of our Constitution, who doesn't have any leadership experience in terms of leading people and real combat experience like I have. There's a huge contrast that I want to offer. Yeah. And then the team, certainly for me, it's not about me. It's about the team and the expertise that I will bring to our A team, the Jenkins A team, that will serve our district. And so I want to be in that chair so that we can have that voice and have that influence. And I would love to have an opportunity where, if I'm going to drive hard to be in the House Armed Services Committee, for sure that's going to be a priority. And even if that doesn't happen in the first round, I will still seek to have influence in that arena, along with certainly the issues that are important here at home with water and land. That's our bread and butter here. But I'd love to be in a hearing where, say, the Secretary of Defense is answering a question, and all too often those questions are answered with, Congressman, I just don't know. We'll take that for the record. Yeah. And I would love to have my calling card be, I don't think so, Secretary. Yeah. Where are you at tomorrow? Yeah. You've got 1 million people that work for you. I'll be in your office tomorrow, and we'll get that answer. Yeah. Oh, you won't be there tomorrow? Okay. Where are you going to be Monday? Yeah. I'm going to drive for accountability. Yeah. When you look at just Afghanistan as one example, there has been zero accountability for that. Yeah. And now here we are in Ukraine. Just today, the Senate passed, $100 billion supplemental, I believe. Yep. So you have the Republican and the Senate majority leader now flying on an airplane to Kiev, unloading pallets of American crisp dollar bills with no accountability. No accountability. Who knows where that's going?
It legitimately is going anywhere.
Off the airplane.
It's going off the airplane and into oblivion. And we were doing that in Afghanistan. It's the exact same thing that we were doing in Afghanistan.
All too eager to leave and run out of Afghanistan to run right into another hot mess. Yeah. But meanwhile, they argue, well, if we just had this, we could shut down the border. If you just give us this authority, we could shut. We already had that. Yeah. You don't need any more power. You don't need any more authority. Donald Trump proved that it can be done. Yeah. So why do you need more?
Right.
So shut down our border. Protect our own country before we protect the borders of others.
Well, and I think it's interesting too. I've heard this argument too. It's like it's a this or that, right? It's because there's this isolationist. I was listening to his former military defense, liaison, a guy with all this experience in the military, and his thought too is like, we can't just ignore the United States has inserted itself into places all over the world, right? Our ability to just pick and choose where we are at this point, just to be this isolationist country, that's really not an option, right? The understanding would be it's not an option. And I agree. It's not. We can't just say pull the rug and say, oh no, we're just going to leave, right? That's not it. But we can exert that power in a way that we can have both things. It doesn't have to be to the tune of $100 billion, right? It's like, what's the minimum thing that we could give them with clear results? We need A, B, C, and D to happen for you to get this allocation and this allocation. It's not that. It's just these blank checks that just get sent out, and there's no accountability for that. And that just seems so irresponsible. It's so irresponsible that no one would do this in their own house. Why would we allow them to do it at the federal government level? Yeah. And I just don't get it.
Yeah. And neither do the rest of us, but an important component of all of that. And to be sure, we always want our fight for defense to be an away game.
Yeah.
We don't want it to be
Yeah.
a home game. So we
Yeah.
have to maintain strength and force abroad. That's why we're still in Japan from World War II. Germany, Hawaii, Guam, all of these areas. Hawaii is clearly one of our states, but we maintain that forward posture so that our fight is always an away game.
Right.
But there are partners in that. There's this thing called NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we the 911 for all of the NATO countries?
Yeah.
And Trump clearly recognized that. Just yesterday, he said, hey, NATO countries, if you're not paying your share like you signed in the treaty that you would do, why are we the only ones doing that?
Yeah, Finland.
So
We allowed them in, and
Yeah.
they didn't even have to commit to the 2% minimum GDP requirement, right?
So Trump puts him on notice. Hey, you don't pay your fair share, then why should we bother to defend you?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to be certainly. That doesn't mean I'm arguing for we abandon NATO or anything, but that demand for accountability, keeping people on their heels, and recognizing it's not just we're not just the gravy train, we're not just business as usual. That requires leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership, judgment, accountability, and that's what we're lacking in my race, and the contrast that I hope to bring for people to consider.
Now I know this is definitely not towards your candidacy, but I got to ask you since I got you in the room.
Yeah.
There's a book called The New Rules of War by Sean McVeigh.
Okay.
They actually gave it to my buddy. He was at the War College there in
Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
in Pennsylvania.
I'm a graduate of the War College.
And so this book is being given to current military members to read, and it's the idea that this World War II vision, this Captain America version of American military is this ideal that we've actually tried to just perpetuate. Yet those strategies have not won us victories since the World War II. We could say we won in Korea. We didn't win in Korea, right? Especially just looking at what happened in the North Korea, basically saying that South Korea isn't even a part now.
Yeah.
Now they're an enemy. South Korea is an enemy, right? So it's nope, we didn't win there. We didn't win in Vietnam, right? We didn't win in Afghanistan. We didn't win in Iraq, right? Every single time there's this big push. There's a bunch of people dead. There's a disaster, civilians dead. We have this strategy. We think that this forward force and show of force is solving some problems, but it's not. It's almost like it's kicking the can down the road to solve some problem later on, and it never actually solves any problem. So in the book, his argument is we have to understand that the current trajectory we are on is not the way the rest of the world is fighting. We've already shown that we can be defended like this opposing force, right? If we go on the offense, they can defend themselves by blending in with the culture and doing basically what the Palestinians have done in Israel and just blend themselves right in with the civilian population and make them an invisible force that we don't know who we're fighting. Yeah. They did in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's this idea that we have to start rethinking the way the military operates, from the DoD back all the way through. And my thought is there really, do you see that we have to have real restructuring of the United States military? Do you see that? Is it not that extreme? Or maybe what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, there are elements of all of that I see now. And ultimately, it all boils down to leadership. When leadership matters, then our military becomes relevant. We become a deterrent. And when you look at the shape of the world right now, there are no shortage of fires. And a great example of this is under Jimmy Carter. What happened in Iran? The Iranians overran our embassy. They took countless Americans hostage. The day that Ronald Reagan was sworn in, what did Iran do? They said, "Oh, never mind. So sorry, America. Can we be your best friends again? Here, Americans, please go home," because they recognize that leadership matters. And when that another example that we're living right now, our Army's at its lowest number since World War II. They keep missing recruiting every year, like for the past 2 years in a row.
And they're giving massive amount of money to encourage people to stay in.
Why? Because people like my daughter's generation, they want to follow winners.
Yeah.
They want to follow where their sacrifice matters. And right now in our military leadership, our civilian military leadership, our Secretary of Defense is gone for a week and the president doesn't even know. How in the world does that happen?
Yeah.
Me as a young platoon leader, if I had a private or a sergeant miss formation, there were consequences.
Yeah.
But now at the highest level, you can skip work for a week and your boss, the president, doesn't even know, which is a problem in itself.
Especially when you have hot wars, legitimate daily briefs on exactly what's happening, especially in Israel and Ukraine.
So all of these symptoms are they're symptoms of a larger problem that leadership matters. But in terms of the elements of how we can be a successful military fighting force, well, one, we have to be ready and lethal. We have to stop focusing on things like how can we help abortion become more prevalent in the Department of Defense? How can we use taxpayer dollars to pay for the travel so that abortions can be available? I mean, that's what's happening right now. That was part of that vote that Celeste approved, that abortion would still be enabled by taxpayer dollars. Things like that are being lumped into our national defense that make our fighting force less relevant, less lethal, less ready. Me as a special operator, our focus is on working by, with, and through our host nation partners. That's really where we have tangible success. Like in Colombia, like you said, you don't hear what we were doing there.
Right.
But Colombia is a lethal fighting force who's beaten back the FARC, the drug people in Colombia, to a point where now they have a chance. They have a fighting chance. And our commitment there is less.
Yeah.
The Colombians we want to work ourselves out of a job.
Yeah.
Essentially. We still need to have mass. We still need to have tanks and maneuver and the conventional forces so that we can maintain our presence. But to truly have success, it's by, with, and through those that own and live there.
I think that's part of the big summary of his point is that it's a as much as we're in a global war as a military force, we need to get a lot leaner and more special operating focused, right? We need to be far more strategic about where we deploy and how we deploy the resources that we have, considering we have this massive amount of resources that are being allotted to this, is that we can be so much more effective at the soldier level. I think he's in his perspective, we're so top heavy, right? Where the individual soldier is not getting the actual boots on the ground, the person who has the rifle in his hand, talking to the local forces. They're not getting the resources. The resources are being spent at the very, very highest level, whether it's through, massive, technology or weapons development in these massive amounts of money, yet the individual soldier has the biggest impact of what actually happens on the ground and in the region, right? If we could pour those resources more directly and more strategically right there to those individuals, that have raised their hand and saying, I'm willing to go put my own life and expertise on the line. That's what I think he's kind of calling for in that in that book. So I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And back to like you're saying, the technology, our argument now is we can rely on our technology to be more of our defense. We don't need to be so robust anymore. But that was the argument in Afghanistan. We can use over the horizon technology, which means we don't have to be there. We can do a drone strike and we'll be okay. Well, before the dust had even settled in Afghanistan, we did a drone strike and we killed 8 or 7 innocent Afghan civilians that we thought were bad guys. And that came at the price of 13 Americans that were killed with the terrorist bomb. So we already demonstrated that our own strategy wouldn't work before we even left Afghanistan, and we were all too eager to throw the keys in the air of Bagram Airfield and let the Chinese catch it.
Yeah,
and
they
turn
did.
The lights back on. And so,
they did. Well, and I think even so, and this will be my last point, but seeing what the Ukrainians have done to just the Russian Navy, this is like the highlight. This is like a highlight of this whole underdog story that is Ukraine versus the Russian military is for pennies on the dollar. They're being far more effective with these
unconventional attacks,
unconventional tactics that prove to have devastating results in some ways, right? And so it's definitely I think we're just throwing good money after bad. Over and over when it comes to the military, which is frustrating, right? And then it's in the name of security, and I want us to be safe. I want my kids to be safe. I don't want anybody, I want an away game. I don't want a home field game, and so I could see that difficulty. So taking that into the strategies of Congress and the halls of Congress. What are some of the coalitions like? What are you trying to? What team do you see yourself participating in? I guess if that question makes sense to you.
Yeah, great, all great questions. I see myself participating in the 2nd District team.
Yeah,
I will align myself with leaders and ideas that are good for our district, because ultimately I'm an employee. I'm a public servant hired by the voters of the 2nd District. I'm not beholden to anyone else.
Yeah.
You can look at my campaign fundraising so far, the publicly provided records we had to file, and you can see that, compare mine to my opponents and all the special PACs, all the special interest groups that you have no idea who these people are that are donating to her campaign. Well, why is that?
Yeah.
Because now she's beholden to them.
Yeah.
They have an interest. They have a hook in her well-being, if you will, and her being elected. And so for me, I will align myself with interests and ideals and groups that are good for our district. But then hearkening back to what I learned as a warrior, the coalitions and compromises I had to make in Afghanistan with tribal leaders who had no reason to trust me. They just wanted whatever I could give them, but to trust and work with me. I had to build those hard-earned relationships of trust with boots on the ground, listening, learning, finding ways that we could both win, and not compromise on my mission just so I could be their friend. No, I could stay strong on my mission, but I could bring them along as well. And the same in Colombia. I had grumpy Colombian colonels who didn't want to trust American gringos. They wanted to do their thing. But I had to earn my way under that tent. And I did that in Washington, D.C. I've already done that. And so that's the approach and attitude that I will take, is I will build coalitions of trust, and where I need to stand alone, I will stand alone. If I need to stand against the door and say, we're not leaving this room until we figure it out, then over my dead body kind of thing.
Yeah.
One voice can now become 2, can become 3. And I'm not going to go and just throw bombs just to throw bombs.
Right.
I'm going to make sure that I take votes on principles. Am I adding to government? Am I increasing our debt? Am I jeopardizing our national security? Those will be key things that I will align myself. Groups that think similarly, that's where I will seek to work.
Well, so locally, I really appreciate the campaign contribution conversation, because it's a catch-22 in 2 different ways, right? Is in one sense, you can raise a lot of money through individual donors, and you have less, dollar per donor number where you might collect a ton of money. And on the other side, you have the Nikki Haley approach, right? Where you're collecting lots of money from less individuals, but it's still the game that's afoot, right? There's no limit on how much money you can spend in a campaign, and people can donate money for any reason, and there's really not a whole lot of accountability after the fact anyway, right? So, in that fundraising piece, how do you see yourself campaigning over the next 4 to 6 months? Like, where is it that your focus is in, and maybe I just always run into this where voters are like, well, who's winning in the polls? Because they want to vote for somebody they think is actually going to win, right? They want to vote for the guy that doesn't win, or the gal that doesn't win. Yeah. So where do you see your strategy and trying to get to the voters and get to the people that are voting?
Yeah, literal boots on the ground.
Yeah.
We did 6 events in the last 10 days, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Being in homes, as people hear my story and my experience and meet my team and get a sense of the attitude and the positive contrast, then they're signing up.
Yeah.
And it's been frankly humbling. And not just only here in Utah, but former soldiers that I served with, former people that I've worked with who see the opportunity to have their values represented, to have the Constitution continue to be defended by someone who's put their life on the line already for it.
Yeah.
Who's already sworn an oath that's been in place for 30 years.
Yeah.
People want to align with that. So right now it's just we just have to work.
So you're calling, this is a call to support,
call to action. Yes.
Call to action.
Go to our website. Yeah.
Go to the website, you reach out to you, figure out how you can be a delegate. I think is going to be a huge piece too, is especially in, I think that would be probably the biggest victory that you could take going into the election season, even though you're gaining signatures as well as winning that caucus. It seems like in Utah is the biggest way for you to have a fighting chance. Would you agree?
Yeah. So just to clarify there, so we have the caucus March 5th. Delegates will get elected. Then the convention is the last weekend in April. And so between March 5th and April, we will be laser focused on delegates, making sure that they have an opportunity to vet me, to hear our story, and then to win at convention. That's our focus.
In that convention, yeah.
But as you mentioned, there is the signature gathering route, and I'm not running away from that. There'll be people that Celeste is not gathering signatures.
Interesting.
And she's going to come at me and say, well, he's going to tell you that your vote doesn't matter because he's going to get signatures anyway. Well, my response to that is that's just another good example of a lack of leadership, a lack of judgment. Because when I go into battle, you better expect and demand of me that I'm going to do everything possible legally to win for you, to represent you the best that I can. I'm not going to go into a battle and leave one of my best weapons at home.
Yeah.
And right now, the system, the Utah legal system, provides for convention pass and signature. And you better want me to be at that finish line, no matter how I get there legally.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go in and with one arm tied behind my back.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on the delegates. I want to win at the convention. That's our focus.
Yeah.
But I'm going to make sure that I win regardless, legally.
What's your thought about the signature gathering thing? Do you think that's an appropriate way to go about the election process? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, it seemed to work for decades in Utah. It seemed to be just fine
Without gathering
signatures.
Yeah.
But then I'm not a student of how it actually and when it actually changed.
Yeah, I'm still trying to flush that out myself. I've heard a couple of different stories on it. I'm still trying to flush it out.
But my sense is that enough party establishment candidates got beat at convention and said, we can't allow this to happen. We have to have another way for us to make sure we can still get on the ballot.
Yeah.
And so the Utah legislature created, I forget what the bill is, but the opportunity for candidates to gather signatures. So I think that's one line of thinking, is that candidates who were getting beat didn't like that and wanted to make sure they had another path way to get there.
Yeah, as a single party state, right? You think, how does the state making a rule against how a party operates in their own election process? To me,
great perspective.
Those two things, they don't really match up. They're definitely not American in my mind. Like thinking of like how the Constitution was set up, what the founding fathers saw, why we went with a republic rather than a direct democracy. And there's a lot of debate on whether that's right or wrong. But even the foresight in my mind, thinking of a nation of, several 100 million people, right? With only 435 members of the House, we have 100 senators. Like, how do we funnel out, the people that are actually paying attention versus the mob, right? Yeah. Because the mob has this big voice that isn't always in it, driven by self-interest, not by what's best for the nation, right? It's their self-interest.
Echo chamber too.
This echo chamber, yeah. And I think we're seeing that so strong now, where that mob rule and that direct democracy undermines itself just in its own right. So I think that thought process. So it's interesting to me that Utah, as a Republican state, as a conservative state, decided to go that route.
And so for me, while it's not ideal,
I like your opinion. You're like, if this is a strategy, I'm gonna take the tools that I have, right? And that's how you win battles. That's how you win the seats, and you're smart and thoughtful about how you're going to go about it.
Yeah, it's not something to run away from. It's not something to say, well, he doesn't think your vote counts. No, I think it really counts, and I want to make sure I'm there so it does count.
Yeah.
And so as a delegate, as a voter, you should demand of me that I exercise every legal means available so that I'm there for you. Yeah. And that I don't go into it half-baked. And so I'm excited for the state convention and I love, it's been awesome engaging delegates and listening and learning, because I'm excited to offer that live positive contrast between me and my opponent, and to allow people to truly vet and hear and touch and see the difference. And I'm confident, I'm hopeful that people will recognize that, and they'll come off of, I'm just comfortable and look for what's best. Yeah.
I want to say that I'm a better interviewer than I actually am, but one of the thoughts, I don't always see the opposing viewpoint. So maybe if you could take a second and say, as the opposition would say this about me, what would you say is something that might be pointed at as to why would we not vote for you, and maybe a response to that? Maybe could you play the I think it's straw man. Could you play like the devil's advocate? Yeah.
In the military, we call that red teaming.
Yeah,
You're
red
team.
Yeah.
And that's always vital, because if you do not test or evaluate your plan without red teaming it, then you're going in blind to your weaknesses. And so for me, I can go back to a conversation I had with a local leader who in learning of my candidacy and me just filling the relationship and trying to share my story, the response was, well, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with Celeste. And my response, I wasn't snarky. I just said, well, I hope to earn your support as you get to learn more about what we're bringing. But I wanted to say, well, look what Comfortable's gotten us.
Yeah.
Look what Comfortable's gotten us. Mm-hmm. Some will say, hey, she's been working on these issues for years, and that's true. Where are those solutions?
Yeah.
Where are those? Why do we still have water problems? Why do we still have the federal government overreach into Utah? If she's been working on them for years, then where are those solutions? Yeah. I'm sure there are some, and I'm not smart enough yet to point to them individually, but I hear enough complaint as I'm interacting with delegates to recognize that there hasn't been sufficient solutions. Yeah. So for me, there's a difference between being an expert and a leader. You can have all the expertise in the world, but if you're already compromised, if people already aren't sure of you, and you've already been bulldozed and put in a corner irrelevant, then that expertise does none of us any good. So for me, leadership is about surrounding yourself with experts. And I learned that front and center as an A-team leader. Yeah. As a Green Beret captain, I was not the smartest man on the team, but I was surrounded by experts in their fields. And they looked to me for direction, looked to me for ways that they could be successful so their expertise could serve good. And so as a member of Congress, as a public servant, that's the approach I'm going to take. Yeah. Leadership. I'm going to make sure that our voice, that my A-team is relevant and isn't in the corner because we've already been compromised or because people look at us and say, well, when did you even bother to vote as a civilian before? I mean, if it wasn't important to you then, why is it now suddenly all important? Yeah. Why are you now selfishly saying, well, it's important now because the spotlight's on me, but when the spotlight was away, how did you act? Yeah. Were you a serious citizen at that time? Did you take your civic duties responsibly then? Take them serious? No. That's the answer. Those are the facts. Yeah. And so we're going to make sure that culture of leadership and judgment is present for the 2nd District.
Nice. That's a good point. Yeah, I think the tactician versus the leader, right, is that you have a leader and then you have the expert in that one field, right? And that expert in one field doesn't just make a great leader, right? They're a useful tool in accomplishing the mission, but the leadership ability to organize a proper, a strategy, right? An overall, overarching strategy, I think is super important and something we're for sure missing. We're for sure missing it. In Congress, for sure, we're missing that leadership ability. I think so. Yeah. I think so. Well, so, couple pointed questions. Yeah. Who are you endorsing, or who would you endorse for the presidency?
Yeah. So I've voted for Donald Trump in both previous elections, and I will vote for him again. Yeah. Ultimately, I vote for the Republican nominee. Having a Republican in the White House is just too important. The stakes are too high. The downstream effects of not having a Republican are catastrophic, as we can clearly see now. I've encountered some Republicans who say, well, I would never vote for Trump, and I respect that. But my response is, well, how is your life now, 3 years removed? How is our border? How is the economy? How is our standing in the world? Yeah. In just 3 years, those have been turned upside down. So that's where I stand. So I think as Supreme Court justices, I want a Republican making those decisions. Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, EPA, all of those decisions are influenced by who is in the White House. Yeah. And so that's where I fall on that.
Now, what if he's left off the ballot? What if he's convicted? What if he can't? What if he's not allowed to run?
Yeah, I think we have bigger issues then.
I'm trying to figure out, what does that look like? I think a lot of people have their head in the sand, and the assumption is like, oh, that won't happen. But what if it does?
Yeah, then we've got bigger issues, I'm afraid. Justice needs to be applied equally. Justice is blind in America, but right now
we could get pretty creative.
Yeah. We could get pretty creative. that goes back to the creative piece.
Yeah, I think there will be there's already a lack of trust in the election process, voter integrity, chain of custody on your vote. So to now see the leading candidate removed, there would be...
Well, it's okay. That's great. That's a great segue too, because this is another piece of the puzzle. Now, I know I don't want to take too much. We're pushing right at an hour. Okay. But election integrity, and I've had a lot of candidates. They don't want to talk about this. They're like, the systems are ran by the county, and the county's doing a great job. Is essentially like what it kind of boils down to. Is that other counties, other districts have problems with their election, where there's a lot of people in Southern Utah that do not agree with that. And in me right now, I'm on the fence. I'm like, I'm not quite sure. Like I see this perspective over here. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. And then I'm like, this makes a lot of sense over here too. And, there's good people that I trust the people in Southern Utah, in those positions. But I could see that there's a lot of holes in it. What's your take on, I don't know if you've done too much research in the local side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look back at January 6th, all that happened there is a definite result of a lack of confidence in our voting system, voter integrity, chain of custody. When you drop your ballot in the box, I mean, now we get a text saying it was received and it's been counted. So that's great, I guess.
And I think you got to sign up for that.
Yeah, you have to sign up for
like
that.
If you don't sign, it's like a separate part of the whole thing. And so anyway, which I'm like, that doesn't.
Yeah. So for me, I think there's the approach of good, better, best.
Okay.
Right now, we're pretty good in our system. And I definitely believe in federalism, that the states have the opportunity to set their own rules and to govern how they want to do it. But we have to make sure that all states have at least some baseline qualifications, voter ID, ballot watchers, things like that, to make sure there is integrity. But I would love to see one day of voting, a national day of voting. I would love to see paper ballots. I'd love to see my vote completed, handed in, and counted before I leave. I would love to see that. Now, is that feasible? Some would argue no, but we've seen other nations make that possible.
We did it forever.
Yeah. Things are just too hard right now.
It's like the 90s. We were doing that in the 90s. Like they were just the hanging chads. Like I remember the hanging chads. It wasn't that long ago. We don't have that many more people. And truthfully, Henry Ford showed us the assembly line works great
right?
Point. Like we added all this technology. We over technologied everything in my mind. I don't know why. And it's almost like an ego thing to where it's like, well, we're so far down this road, we can't go back now. And now it's like we have to add in more things to check all of the, issues that we've created. It's just a mess in my mind.
Yeah, and part of it is we're asking the fox to guard the hen house.
Yeah.
And
even certification of the votes. Like I didn't realize here in St. George, like the city council members, if you're an incumbent running, you certify the election of your own vote. Yeah. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
That can't keep going, right? We can't. That doesn't make a whole
fox garden. Yeah, it's
and I actually trust all these people. I'm like, I don't think they would actually do something, but it's given the opportunity to. Yeah. Why would they not necessarily take the option? And you might not always have somebody you trust in that position doing that. It's just from a processes system, you're like, I'm not attacking the person. I'm just looking at the system and it either makes sense or it doesn't. Yeah. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
There are ways for it to be influenced.
So do you think that would be some, obviously because you're running for a U.S. seat, it's not in your purview to tell the state how to do their own election, correct. Right? I'm going to put that over here to say you can't necessarily impact it. But from your perspective, do you feel like we should either add additional eyes on this? Would you encourage, lawmakers here in the state to take a second look at it? Where do you kind of land on that?
I would, and I would, for our district, I would certainly stand with local leaders who want to bring better scrutiny of our system, who are willing to have courage to stand up and say we can do better. Yeah, we're pretty good right now, but we can do better. Yeah. So me as a federal representative, I would lend my voice, my office, our talents to any good measure that would support increasing voter integrity. Yeah. That's that chain of custody. When your vote is cast, you want to see it counted. Yeah. And so I will stand with any leader who wants to improve that.
Can I ask who you endorse for the U.S. Senate seat?
So yeah, candidly, I am still learning the candidates myself.
Okay.
And so
I know a great podcast that you can learn. You can hear
I've been watching,
interviews.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So for me, I fall back to, well, what am I looking for? How am I as a voter going to judge these candidates, and how do I want to be judged too? And so I'm looking at those three core principles: who stands for limited government, who stands for fiscal responsibility, and who's going to make me feel safe on national security issues. Yeah. Those are three core principles to me. And then I look at, how have they done this, whether they've been in elected office already, which, is somewhat, if this is just another notch in someone's belt, then that causes me pause. Mm-hmm. This isn't just climbing a ladder to get another position. This is about true public service. Yeah. And so for me, that's important to gauge, why is someone really doing this? Just because it's the next step in their career? Mm-hmm. Or are they truly invested in those three core principles? And will they, like me, even if they haven't worn the patch on their shoulder, would they stand by me and not compromise? Yeah. Is that someone like Senator Lee that I can stand by and say, yeah, I got your back. I'm not going to vote yet because back to that issue we talked about at the beginning, about the FISA protection. This gentleman that came at me hard Saturday night, he said, "Yeah, but it's going to get fixed. Like in even 2 weeks, they're going to start working on it. So that yes vote it's going to get fixed." And I was just laughing in my head. You are a perfect example of the establishment. Yeah. Rubber stamp. We'll fix it later. We'll kick the can, no matter how many Americans we hurt in the meantime.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for leaders who want to stand with me on the wall like that.
Yeah. We're running out of time. Like, we're legitimately.
Yeah.
The budget only goes so far. The DoD needs its funding, right? Like, there's a clear line of saying, okay, we can appropriate that money maybe differently. Maybe we don't grow it as much as we have in years past, but for sure, a lot of these things, there's a huge national security issue, a part of this portion of the funding.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have to make every single vote matters right now because of just that one thing in my mind is that federal debt and that budget is we have to stop spending money
that we don't have.
That it's getting paid for by other countries because that's who we're borrowing the money from. Like, it's crazy to me that's what we keep going. So it's like, we're going to just vote because we're going to fix it later without kicking that can down the road. I think you're exactly right. It's just, we have to stop somewhere. How far do we got to fall for this thing to happen?
Because it's on the backs of our grandchildren that aren't even born yet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. All right. Well, let's wrap it here.
Okay. Can I leave you with one final thought?
Yes, please do. That was it.
Back to my motivation of why I'm running. This was twirling in my head. I have a mentor who I heard him speak once, and he said, when I look at the world burning, I look at our Congress, I look at our nation, I ask myself, well, who else is coming to fix this? And the answer is no one. No one else is coming. No one's going to ride over that hill on a white horse in a shining armor and say, I've got the solution. So why not us?
Yeah.
And that was really the impetus for me to get off the fence and throw my hat in the ring. I don't want to do this. I don't want to lay in bed at night and think, I got to ask my friends for support and money. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But it has to be done.
Yeah.
That duty's calling, that public service, because no one else is coming. And I may be just one voice, but where there's one, there will be two.
Yeah.
And then there will be three. So if you're happy with being comfortable with the current solution, then keep on being comfortable. And I'll see where that takes you. But if you want to stand up because no one else is coming, then please join our team.
Yeah.
And that's the motivation that's driving us.
Colby Jenkins?
Colby for Utah, FOR. Yep.
COLBYFOR Utah.com.
Yes, sir.
To support you financially, which is a big help, but it's boots on the ground. We got to get people run for the delegates, right? Please. Run as a delegate, run as somebody who cares in your neighborhood, essentially, is what a delegate is. It's like, I'm going to go pay attention. I'm going to work to bring that voice into the convention and vote for, good representatives for Utah, and every single vote matters. So
thank you.
We got to get out there, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Good luck. Good luck, man.